From years of anxiety to warrior and mentor, Bradley Robinson created the Anxiety Project to help you end your anxiety naturally. Let's mold the new you and let's end anxiety together.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Anxiety Project podcast. Welcome to 288. And we're talking about dopamine. We're talking about addiction in the age of indulgence where all our simple needs are met. We're satiated, but we feel more agitated and we're feeling more body pains and we're feeling more inflammation than ever before in the human condition. One of my favorite doctors on Instagram posted an interesting video of people walking around New York in the 1950s, and everyone was so thin. You can't even spot one obese person in the crowd of hundreds and hundreds of people walking by. It's a remarkable piece of footage. I was like, this is baffling. And he compared it to footage nowadays, people in New York, and one in three people are overweight. They're obese. I couldn't believe it. And, it just makes me think about how all our basic needs are met and how things just spiraled in the wrong direction. And hey, look, today depression and anxiety is at an all-time high. And I want to talk about Dr. Anna Lembke's book today, Dopamine Nation, because this book skyrocketed to one of my favorite books I've ever read. I'm dead serious about this. This book, it's so packed full of information, of practical, important information. And every page I'm like, wow, this is hitting me in very deep places. And I recommend that you pick this book up. I'm going to talk about a lot of her points today in this podcast episode, and I want to weave in my experience with recovery. And I'm going to have this is going to be a two-parter, so this is going to be part 1. And in part 1, I'm just going to dive into the neurotransmitter dopamine and the seesaw of pain and pleasure that's happening in the brain that creates this addiction. And the addiction can be from negative thoughts to social media to Netflix, to all sorts of things, all the way up to pornography, alcohol, drug addiction. And we're going to dive into that today. So if you don't think you're addicted to something, just wait until the end of this episode, because you're going to find something in your life that you're addicted to. And it's funny because I've overcome many addictive things. And then reading this book, I'm unraveling other things, smaller things, but not so small, that I'm latching my teeth into, because for me, I noticed that I have an addictive, obsessive personality. When it comes to pornography recovery, for me, I have to separate myself. There's no moderation here. I don't believe in that personally, because the reason I was addicted to it before is because I'm looking for this transcendent experience, and I get obsessive over the things that grip me. And I'm honing this obsessive personality into other healthier things like exercise, like time in nature, meditation. I'm just in doing the podcast, doing these videos, and being a part of this community. A lot of people have to go to like AA meetings or go to church or join clubs in order to hone this monster. And we all have these monsters, and it will come out. And I see it all the time with people around me, close family, friends. I can see them hooked into these things, and so am I. When it comes to phone or shopping, I can easily tap into that monster. It's right there, right under the surface. So that's what we're talking about today. So if you're interested, let's dive in. Let's talk about this. There's a quote from this book that I want to touch upon first. And Anna Lembke says, the reason we are all so miserable Maybe because we're working so hard to avoid being miserable. Working so hard, we're numbing ourselves, soothing ourselves, distracting ourselves with these things. We have more time on our hands than ever before. We have access to these things. They're so immediate. They're at our fingertips, literally. And this is the Ouroboros. It's the dragon that eats its own tail. It's chaos. That's what the Ouroboros is. It's chaos. Chaos is the thing that holds potential, but it's the thing that if you are a slave to it, it will devour you. And you think you're helping your anxiety by smoking marijuana, but then what happens is the anxiety is heightened because of your usage of marijuana. And you think the marijuana is helping your anxiety, but the anxiety is being heightened because of your usage with marijuana. And a lot of people who cut marijuana out will realize that, well, it's rough at first to go through the withdrawal symptoms, but at the end of that, their anxiety actually gets better as a consequence. And so that's interesting. We'll dive into that more deeply today. But she also says in the book that 34% of Americans who surveyed, so it's probably way more, a bit higher percentage of that, really, out of all Americans, says that they feel pain, body aches, inflammation, pains often throughout the month. That's a high number, 34% out of millions and millions of Americans. So you just throw a rock at somebody and they'll say, I suffer from this sort of inflammation or this pain, aches. And so people are taking medication like mad. People are numbing themselves like mad, distracting themselves. And the culture is working against us. And I have to work so damn hard to not fall into the slavery of these addictions. I really have to work every day to keep myself in check. It really is a struggle, but it's a worthwhile struggle because I feel better as a consequence from being separated from these things. Dopamine is our motivational neurotransmitter. The wanting more than the attainment. Think about that. It's the wanting. And you know that. It's the lead up to the thing that's around the corner. You know you're going to get it. You get it, it feels great, and you get that hit spike of dopamine, and the pleasure balance goes all the way up to pleasure. You feel great. But it's like, when is it the next time? Because you're going to come down from that. And we're going to talk about that too. So dopamine, we get something good before, it spikes our dopamine, and now we are hooked into wanting that thing again, which then the anticipation of it becomes ever so prominent in our life. Pleasure in the pursuit, people. Pleasure in the pursuit. Now, this is interesting. For a rat, these acts/substances increase the basal output of dopamine by chocolate 55%. So it's pretty high. Makes sense, sugary things. Sex 100%. That's incredible. Nicotine 150%. Cocaine 225%. Amphetamine, like speed, Adderall for ADD, that's 1,000%. That's 1,000%. That's incredible. And what's also incredible is mice who are unable to make dopamine will not seek out food. Pleasure and pain is co-located in the brain. And that's so interesting. It's a balance. So imagine a seesaw, it's, this board on this fulcrum, right? And it's level. That's homeostasis. It's level. But, you get that pleasurable thing. And the more and faster it tips to the side of pleasure, what happens to the other side? The other side is pain, right? So pleasure goes up to one side and then pain goes down. And we get engulfed in that pleasurable act. It takes over. There's nothing but that pleasure. We don't feel that pain, and it's great. But the balance wants to remain level. It wants to remain in a homeostasis state. So what happens when the pleasureful act is not there anymore? We go about our day, we think it's adding something of value because of how great it felt. But the seesaw starts to tip. It starts to tip. And what happens? The pain starts to rise, starts to come back up. Because it doesn't remain tipped to pleasure for too long. Because self-regulating mechanisms in the body kick in to bring it level again. So habits like weed, alcohol, medications, pornography, video games, they're short-lived. They're short-lived because we get that kick, we get that spike, and we get that reward for engaging. But in the end, when we're separated from it, we're going to feel like a slave because now that thing that is causing so much pleasure has taken up mental real estate. You're thinking about it, you're anticipating, and it gets real scary the more we're going to dive into this, because that's not even the worst of it, that we're hooked. It gets real interesting. It gets real interesting. And so when we begin to feel the pain side of the seesaw, we then seek out that pleasurable thing. Repeated exposure to the same or similar stimuli, the side of pleasure, gets shorter and weaker, and the other response to that side of pain gets longer and stronger, and that's neuroadaptation. That is crazy. We need more of our drug of choice to get the same effect. We need more. That's so insane. So the side of pleasure, it gets shorter and weaker the more we engage. So we're going to unconsciously seek out more stimulating things, novelty. Your brain gets used to that video game you're playing, and you move on to the next one. Or pornography, another great example of scrolling, the anticipation of the climax, and that can last for hours. Some people do it all day long. All day long. We need more of our drug to get the same effect. So our tolerance is affected. And then this is the scary part. This is what blew me away. Our vulnerability to pain goes up. Because we're always seeking pleasure, we're living in pleasure. And then when reality starts to creep its ugly head, how are we going to deal with that? Like responsibility, problems at work or in your family life. What happens? You're going to be way more sensitive to that. And that's really true. That's true. Pleasure continues to extend itself towards more and more. And thus we feel unfulfilled constantly. Hedonism leads to anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure, because anxiety comes with anhedonia. Depression comes with anhedonia. So you're drowning yourself in pleasure. You're going to realize that your tolerance to it is going to continue to increase. And you're going to crave it more. You're going to crave the novelty of it. So you're going to continue to seek and seek and seek. So the more you repeat a pleasurable habit, the more the original super pleasurable experience diminishes. Wow. Then one seeks out more potent forms of the same drug. Again, with pornography, for me, it was more stimulating videos. The next one is going to be the better video. The next one is going to be the better video. And then it continues and continues. We need more reward to feel pleasure and less injury to feel pain. Whew. When she said that in the book, man, I was like, wow, I can't believe it. Less injury to feel pain. We become so overly sensitive to pain, right? It's so much difficult to take on the weight of the world when you're so overly consumed in this hedonic bubble. How are you going to contend with real problems? Real problems. And then Anna Lembke goes into the symptoms of withdrawal. And she says, these are universal. This is typical. If you separate yourself from your drug of choice, which could be your phone, she says you'll feel anxiety, irritability, insomnia, and dysphoria. So if you're wondering if you are addicted to something, well, first of all, trust yourself and say, well, or treat it like an experiment. I'm going to separate myself from this thing and see if it's a problem. One of the clients Anna had, what that she mentioned in her book, was addicted to marijuana. She would wake up, smoke marijuana all day long, and she thought of herself as not being an addict, but just needing this thing to kind of function in her world. And then Anna suggested, try and go a month without that thing and just see what happens. And the first few days, this woman separated herself from marijuana. She was sick. She was irritable. She was suffering from severe anxiety and throwing up, right? And she told Anna, because she felt all of those things, man, she realized she was an addict because of how bad her symptoms were of withdrawal. And that's so interesting. We just don't really know until we separate ourselves from it. And then Anna goes into the cues from our environment, because this plays a big role. It's time of day, people, places, and things, right? Things trigger us, or people, or the time of day. For me, when people left the house, when I had time alone, it would trigger something, or time of day, it would trigger that feeling to go and do it. And so after the cue from our environment of our drug of choice, dopamine drops below baseline levels. And so this mini deficit state is what drives us to seek out our reward. So we experience this deficit. When the cue kicks in, the pleasure goes up, the pain goes down, but then immediately after, the seesaw tips and the pain starts to come up, starts to go up. And so this is craving, this is motivation towards the reward. So to be clear, this seesaw balance tips to the side of pleasure in anticipation of a future reward, immediately followed by a tip to the side of pain in the aftermath of the cue. So this dopamine deficit is craving. So interesting. Come on. That's unbelievable. Guys, you got to rewind this podcast and listen to this again. This is so incredible. The fact that we know this, we can use this information to work towards freedom of this. I mean, who knows what's on the other side of it until you actually take that leap of faith. And in part 2 of this episode, we're going to talk about recovery steps. We're going to dive into the 12 steps and what it means to, and how do we even separate ourselves? How do we even separate ourselves from this thing? Because, for me, man, when things grip me, I just don't want to let go of them. But it's possible, and I have let go of some of these massive things in my life, like pornography. And what's also interesting is the highest dopamine release is when the probability of winning and losing is 50-50. Being on the edge of novelty. So, like buying concert tickets, for example, being in line to buy a concert ticket, like, oh my God, I'm gonna get my seat, or like and like for me, I get so angry when I can't get a ticket to a show that I want to go to. I'm like, oh my God, I'm just throwing a fit, right? Or you're standing in line to buy the latest iPhone or product, scrolling Instagram, gambling, pornography, shopping. Huge. Being on that edge. Being on that edge. Novelty is exciting. It's stimulating. It's certainly not boring. That's the thing. It's certainly not boring. We can be easily hooked into a bad relationship for this reason. It'll be better around the corner. The wrestling of this. And it's also the fear of losing it and being in that desert. And a lot of people don't know what to do, but if they have this open gap, they're so used to doing something throughout the day and then separating themselves from that, they have this space. And how do they fill their time? And so we'll talk about that in the next episode. Because I get this question all the time, how do you know whether something is a healthy addiction or a negative one? Like, couldn't someone be addicted to martial arts and like that could be a problem? And just to give you a short answer, I'd say, well, we're always going to be in service to something. And if you're obsessed about this spirit of growth and being stronger and building real skills, then that's good. Because what would you say to somebody, like someone who overcomes an alcohol addiction is now obsessed with martial arts and is clean and sober? Will you tell them that what they're doing is wrong? But of course not. Of course, like they're now obsessed over something extremely healthy and good for them. And yeah, we're going to be obsessed about something. So pick what you want to be obsessed about. I choose to be obsessed about the spirit of who I could be, the spirit of growth, the spirit of God. I want to obsess about those things, and because if I don't, I'm going to slide down another road. I'm going to then be obsessed about video games or pornography or myself, like being so self-centered. So that's why when people go through recovery, it's important that they start to connect with a community, start to engage in biological necessities like relationships, communion, God, just higher principles, rather than being so self-centered and a slave to this internal deity that's gripping you and it's driving you. That you feel uncontrolled. And Anna also mentioned in the book that people who are addicted, they lose track of time. They only think in immediate terms, like, okay, today am I going to get that thing? Am I going to get that reward? And it's like the center of their world. But people who are separated from these things, they see things in more of a broader picture, long term. They view time differently, how precious every single day is, and they use their time wisely. The goal is to not be so immediate in reward. We become vulnerable to immediate gratification. And so we have to separate ourselves from that thing, from that drug, so that the brain becomes accustomed to patience, pleasure in the smaller day-to-day things, like sitting on a bench in the sun, going for a walk in the woods, spending time with your loved ones. These things become prominent. The prefrontal cortex becomes more active when you're not overly stimulated. You're able to plan and engage in abstract creative thinking rather than being a slave to your day-to-day desires, impulses, hedonic pursuits. You become more self-actualized, calm, neutral, creative, free. You become free. And so these things that we're engaging in, for boys, there's a commonality here where boys engage more in marijuana, video games, and pornography. These are the big ones for boys. Why? Well, with marijuana, I would say it's the escape. It's being numb from responsibility. It's tapping into more of the creative side of people, I would say. And I think men are looking for that kind of ritualistic kind of experience, this transcendent experience, really. And with video games, what's happening in video games is it's tapping into the biological necessities of males to build skills and go out and hunt and gather, build up themselves, and they do that in the form of their avatar, right on the screen. What happens is, well, they're building their what attack and defense skills and the magic and all of these sorts of skills in the game, and it's dopaminergic because you're building on yourself in the game. And then pornography, it's pretty straightforward. It's the desire to procreate, it's the desire to release with a beautiful mate and to progress your genes forward. It's like we have that desire for a reason, right? And pornography just hooks us in that domain. And then with women, big one is social media, self-image, the idea of that perfect image, how shopping and plastic surgery has become so prominent with women on social media. Maggie talks to me about this all the time. She mentions how judgmental women are on Instagram and how she can be that way on Instagram as well, and how, you can get sucked into this world of self-image. And if you read Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, he talks about how the depression within women is going up so dramatically because of social media alone. Fascinating. So I think it's a great place to stop. I hope that this episode gave you more of an understanding, provided you with more understanding of dopamine. Thanks to Anna Lembke's work. She's brilliant. The book is brilliant. Go pick up Dopamine Nation. And we are all addicted to something because everything in today's culture is working against us. Everything. It's hooking us left, right, and center. And we have to work so damn hard to be self-actualized and independent and to go against the grain today. And when you separate yourself, it's going to be really rough. It's going to be rough at first. You're going to enter this desert-like phase of withdrawal, and you're going to feel irritable and anxious. You're going to feel like you have this need, just one time I'm going to look. But we're going to talk about the recovery more on the next episode. And you're going to find that once you do separate yourself and you get past that 1 month mark, the little things in life, like walking out in the morning with your tea and you see the sun rising up behind the trees, and that feeling of, and this is beautiful. This is, I feel, maybe that's just it. I feel, I'm not so self-indulged in those slave-like deities within me. I think that's it. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I'm really grateful. Let me know what you think on YouTube, but also please head on over to Spotify, rate and review this podcast. Just leave that star rating there. I'd greatly appreciate it. And rise above anxiety. I'll see you next time.
Brad's Powerful Anxiety Recovery Program is now available at unpluganxiety.com. The Anxiety Project program is downloadable and puts the power of anxiety recovery in your own hands. Visit unpluganxiety.com for more details. Recovery starts now.